have these choices that you might have had in other places. She could not get an airplane ticket. She got a cruise ship ticket. It's the only ticket she could get to come. And it was going to take 2 weeks to cross the ocean. About the time that my father had left. Well, my mother had never, the English, this is a stereotype, I guess, but when I went to visit my mother's family, it was kind of true. I asked my uncle, they don't travel. They just don't travel. They just don't travel. And I asked my uncle, don't you ever want to come and visit us? Or what? Because to go visit my mother's family, I had already been through more of England than they had. Just to go visit them. So I asked my Uncle Joe, I said, don't you want to come and visit us? Don't you want to try? He says, well, why would you go away if you're just going to come back? And he meant it, right? My mother had never been more than 2 train stops from home in her life. She lived between Liverpool and Manchester, which is northwest industrial England. Got heavily bombed in the war. One of my mother's, one of the things they used to do, she was in the Battle of Britain. They would get up every morning and they would open the door and see how much new shrapnel there was in it. It's hard to imagine. Houses would go down around them. They were in bomb shelters. And they had all of that stuff. It's hard to think. And what the sound of bombs coming down must have been like. It's hard to understand. Well, my mother, the only place she'd ever, by the way, she grew up, Warrington is between Liverpool and Manchester. Liverpool is where the Beatles were. And she's about the same age. She says, it's possible. It's possible. I could have met them. I could have met them. She was a little older. She only place she had really been, and in England during wartime years, everybody took their vacation at exactly the same time. There was a name for this and a reason. It's so that they could shut down all the factories and retrofit them or fix them, whatever they needed to do, efficiently during that time while everybody went off on their vacation. Everybody in England would go at the same time. And she would go to a place called Blackpool, where she would go out. My mother, very, very white as I said, she'd go out onto the beach there and in her bathing suit, and they had a picture of the sun taped to the sky. They'd all have a good time. Later on, when they came to Nogales, they honeymooned in Guaymas. And my mother, thinking the same thing, right? She goes out onto the beach in her bathing suit, and it wasn't a picture of the sun, right? She got sun poisoning. They had to take her to the hospital that they had there. She said, son, I spent my honeymoon like this. She says, but it's not what you think. Well, my mother got this ticket, and a couple of days later, she was standing on the prow of this big ocean liner, and she was waving goodbye to her family. She was the eldest daughter. And in those days, when you were saying goodbye to your family, it pretty much meant
goodbye.
Forever. Goodbye. And she had no idea what was waiting for her. And she had never traveled. And my mother is about this tall. And so her suitcases were probably about this big. She crossed the ocean. She came to New York City, where she got in trouble because it turns out my grandfather had been a communist. But an industrial Northwest English communist is not the same as a... It was just that word, right? In those days, that word was just like a scary word. You couldn't... There were no gradations of it. But they cleared. That was okay. But she had to stay an extra day in New York. All she had time to do was send a telegraph to where my father was going to be, supposed to be, released from the military, Salt Lake City. And she said, I'm on my way. I hope you're there. So she gets on a train, New York City, and she crossed the country. She gets out, Salt Lake City, the train doors open, and my father's standing there. You know how many times I had to hear this story growing up? But I'm glad. I was sick of it as a kid. I am proud to know that big story as an adult. It helped to define me. It was a big time. they themselves were a big story, and they gave me that view of the world as well as then growing up in Nogales. My mother came to be what was essentially the English nurse in Nogales. And she ended up learning Spanish, but with a British accent. Well, as I said, we didn't call my mother mama or mother. And Spanish was really what I was speaking with my father's family. They all spoke Spanish. They loved my mother. They didn't know how to talk to her, but they loved her, right? And so it took a while. It's never an overnight thing. And as I said, they honeymooned in Guaymas. When they came back on their first year anniversary, one of the stories in our family is every Thanksgiving, it's coming up now. So I'm just thinking about this. My parents always made pecan pies the whole time I was growing up. And by the time I left high school, they were making 30 or 40 pecan pies. And they were giving them to everybody. I asked my mother, where did you get this recipe? Well, there's two parts to this. First of all, the reason they made pecan pies is that on their first 8-year anniversary, my mother knew that my father liked pecan pies. And so she's a new bride still, and she made him a pecan pie. You got to remember, this was early 50s. It's hard to make something like that. You have to make everything from everything. So she makes a pecan pie. But also in those days, you bought all of your condiments loosely, and you would put the salt in the salt thing, the sugar in the sugar thing. Well, somewhere along the line, she had messed that up. So instead of a cup of sugar, she had put in a cup of salt.
Oh.
She's waiting all day. She's all excited. My father comes home from work. He's all excited. They're going to have a pecan pie. It's their anniversary. So she gives him a big piece, and he takes a big bite. His face falls to the floor. My mother just bursts into tears. My father, hugs her, and he takes her back into the kitchen, and together they make another pecan pie. And they made pecan pies every Thanksgiving after. That was their story, right? That's something they gave to me. Later on, I asked my mother, pecan pie? I said, I didn't know the English liked pecan pies. How come? What did you bring this special recipe with you? And she said, no, I got it off the back of a Cairo syrup bottle. This whole family mystique, this whole thing. She said, no, I think he liked pecan pies when he went to Texas. The big mystique of something, right? Underneath it, there's just something so prosaic, simple, and human. I still laugh about that because it was so big, but it was so small. Well, okay. So I grew up in my neighborhood, we were, growing up in Nogales, this has taken me a long time to understand as well. But we lived in one of the first suburbs in the United States. It's called Valle Verde. Anybody know Nogales at all? You know where Valle Verde would be? It's just north of town, about 4 miles. Well, in the beginning, it was the only place out there. And I don't know how to feel about this, and I don't want to look into it. But our neighbors across the street were Mexicano and Japanese. And there was somebody just down the way there was Mexicano and Swedish. Mixed marriages, right? This was a war-bride neighborhood. And my parents had no money. How they were able to afford a new house is still a mystery. And how everybody who had a mixed marriage just happened to get housing outside of town. I don't know how to think about it. But I had a great childhood there. And I got to eat a lot of great stuff in everybody's refrigerators. Right? Rice balls, I'll still forget them. Right? And we were, as friends, we were speaking Spanish. Whatever you speak, whatever you're speaking on the border. It's not Spanish. It's not English. I had a teacher, and many, maybe you know him, or Jose, Miguel Mendez in Tucson. I did a panel on him recently, and it's so sad. His passing was so sad. He was such a major Arizona story. Well, Miguel is a great story at University of Arizona. When I first took a class with him, it was in Spanish department. We were writing our essays and everything in Spanish, and he said, all right, now he says, all you guys from Nogales, I want you to stay after class.
What did we do?
What did we do? And he said, all right, he says, now look here, he says, you think you're writing in Spanish, he said, but you're writing so much yaqui in that Spanish, you don't even know it. And then he went on to show us what we were writing, words like bukis and bichi and koji, yaqui words. And we didn't know it. So what you speak on the border, right, it's a capirotada, right? It really is. And there were no problems with this till we got to first grade. And you were talking about this, right, Ralph? We got to first grade, and one of the, Mrs. Amado, which is even sadder when I think about it, Mrs. Amado. First thing we hear, we're all talking, and she said, oh, you can't speak Spanish in here. So we look around at each other, raised our hand and said, seguro que sí, of course we do speak Spanish, just listen. That's not what I mean. You're not to speak Spanish, and if you do, we're going to swat you. So different ones of us got, nalgadas there. You got to remember though that we were kids. You don't have the politics, the overlaying politics of being an adult yet. And first grade, man, that is an exciting time. It's not home. First grade has cubby holes, chalkboards, kickballs that aren't flat. I remember the second semester of first grade when the teacher, remember those things they used to have, the maps? We used to hit that string all the time, all that string. Big deal. And then the first day of second semester, right, she reaches to that string and she pulls it down. God, a map appeared of the whole world. We had no idea that it was hiding in there. We didn't know what was in there, right? It was like, to a first grader, magic. How could you do that? Well, here we were in first grade, and it had the first grade stuff. So what do you want as a first grader? First grade stuff. And if it took learning English to get it, how long would that take? Just 2 weeks tops, man. Come on. And in some ways, it was kind of true. There were no limits to what we could do. And we learned whatever we learned, but we learned more than teachers thought we were being taught. You learn that you're going to get swatted for speaking Spanish. Our parents had told us you get swatted for doing something bad. So you make a little equation as a kid. You don't articulate it. You don't walk around saying it. Spanish is bad. You just understand it. You take it in. You figure it out. Second grade comes around, you're a little smarter. You figure out that equation, it widens. If Spanish is bad, and your parents are speaking Spanish, they must be bad. It's not hard for a kid to figure out. You don't go around saying it. But you do. You can imagine what our PTA meetings were like. I don't know if we had any. We would get the note in English, right? Now, it was not a big problem in our household, obviously, but it was a problem. We'd get the note in English, second graders. But you know how, as second graders, you have the weight of the world on you. You don't think of it that way, but you kind of do. We knew that if we took the note home, our parents would figure out how to read it. And because they were parents, they would listen to it. And you get something from school. Education is a big deal. The term maestro in Spanish has nothing to do with a school building. It's anybody who teaches you something. I have a lot of respect for that. They would come to school. I knew because my parents, they would come to school. And I knew because my father would come to school. he would want to talk. And if he did, I knew what would come out of his mouth. And if it did, I knew that he would have to get into the SWAT line. It's silly. It's second grader reasoning. It's ridiculous. But as a second grader, it's the only reasoning you have. Very real. I can't say that it was a fear that you are shaking. You just get it. So what we did to take care of our parents because we loved them, we would get the note, we would take it. Yes, miss, we would take the note. And then on our way to the school bus, we had school buses, we already had our walk, second graders, everybody had their walk. And we would go by the trash can, which I will never forget, had stenciled onto it the word basura. Not the word trash. Because if you want somebody to understand what you want, you say it in the language you know they're going to understand. We had our notes in English, and the trash can said basura. So, it was our ritual, our kind of ballet. We would be doing our walks, we would take our notes out, and then because we loved our parents, we would drop them in the trash. There were no problems with this, except that as a little kid, you're having to live the whole world for everybody. You're having to sort this out and protect your parents, learn what you're supposed to be learning, do well, whatever. And I love school, to be honest. I love school. And, second graders, it's one of those funny things. I got busted in second grade for committing the egregious crime of daydreaming. We had big windows, Coronado Elementary School, big windows. And because my mother spoke English, I had an easier time in school because my peers were still struggling with learning things. It didn't mean I was a better or smarter student. I just had a little bit of an edge, so I would get done with my work faster, and then I would daydream. Because what else can you do as a second grader? You get taught something about exploring. We were in Coronado Elementary School, Explorer. We had a little thing, in the hallway there of Coronado the Explorers, before everybody learned all the bad stuff about explorers. If you get taught about exploring as a second grader, what do you want to do? You want to go out and explore. If you're paying attention, if you understand what you're being told, you want to go do it. But you're a second grader. You can't even cross the street without somebody holding your hand, which makes it really hard to be an explorer. But where you can do it is right here. This was the beginning of my writing. It had nothing to do with pencil and paper. It was an act of the unlimited imagination, where I could do the things I could not do. I just got called to school. I'll never forget this. You get something from school, everybody takes it very seriously. They had somebody else pick up my brother. They came to school, they came after school, and what's weird is I was I was right there, I was listening to it all. And they made my parents, they sat in the little second grader chairs, and the teacher, Miss Lee, is sitting there, she said, well, and my parents said, well, did he do something wrong? And she says, well, she said, he's doing very well. He's a very good student, but he's been daydreaming. And my parents said, daydreaming? She said, yes, daydreaming. And they went, daydreaming. And she said, yes, daydreaming. And they went, daydreaming. That was pretty much the conversation. And they said, we'll take care of it. So I'm a little kid. I'm scared to death. This was still in the days when your father would, if you were in trouble, he'd come home, take his belt off, and it was. I hope those days are gone. But that's how it was. So I thought I was going to get it. I was a good kid. You imagine these terrible things that you're going to get in trouble. So we get in the car, and in the cars in those days, there's like a big sofa in the back seat, right? There's no little mini anythings, right? Everything was huge. And my brother wasn't there, and there were no seat belts, so I'm like on this big seat. I'm getting like, buffeted around. I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get no dinner for me, and I'm going to get the belt, and I don't know what. My parents are just talking in the front. Nobody's there, just ignoring me. We drive home. My mother makes dinner. I get dinner. I'm waiting for the belt. No belt. We had a television set, which was like the first in the neighborhood. And they didn't have a TV station in Nogales. You had to have, the whole neighborhood eventually looked like ships with masts. They had all these huge antennas. But all you could get was a station from Tucson that was just starting up. And they didn't have anything yet, so they just played Laurel and Hardy back to back, like for 4 hours a night, every night. Laurel and Hardy for like a year. So I thought, I'm not going to get to see Laurel and Hardy. And the whole neighborhood used to come and watch, right? But they let me do that. I thought, I'm going to get it. I'm going to have, they're going to say something at night, and I'm going to have bad dreams. They didn't. My parents never brought it up. And it was one of the great lessons in my life. I kept waiting. I kept waiting. And I think today we would talk it out. We would whatever. The great lesson was there was nothing to talk about. I had done nothing wrong. It wasn't even worth bringing up. But they left it up to me to figure that out. They didn't tell me. And that helped me with my writing too. That helped me. So I was living in this environment, and I was learning whatever I was learning. And I was a good student, which means that by the end of elementary school, the beginning of junior high school, I couldn't speak Spanish anymore. Because I had learned well, right? It wasn't until my later years of high school and college that I relearned Spanish. I didn't relearn Spanish. It hadn't gone anywhere. What I had to do was relearn my attitude toward it. Here's an important thing. I like to talk about this because I think we have a hard time. We try to intellectually solve everything. We're scared in so many ways today to talk about the body. But if you think about that first grader me, when you come to school, you're leaving the body, the playground, and you're moving to the mind, right? Opening up books. This is a transition time. And it's the same time for example, you're learning to ride a bike. So you learn to ride a bike by getting your balance, right? You stay right on there, and if you lean to the left, you're going to fall over and get hurt. You lean to the right, you're going to fall over and get hurt. You learn your balance. And if you think about this intellectually, if you're speaking English, you're okay. You speak Spanish, you're leaning to the left, you're going to fall over and get hurt. You're going to get swatted. Lean over to the right. And this is another equation we made. What other words do you get swatted for? Dirty words. So you make that equation, which then widens that out as well, until you learn what balance is. All right. So later on in years, we're all talking about struggling with language. I know some Spanish, I know some English, I know I'm here and whatever. We're wrestling with it intellectually, and we've got this great metaphor. What do they say about riding a bike? You never forget. It's in your body. If you think about having a fear of speaking a language, Spanish in particular, you can solve it all you want. You can go read every book you want, but you're going to feel something. You never forget. It's a very difficult thing to address, but it's true. That complicates the solution. It doesn't dictate it, but it complicates it. And it's an important thing to remember, that you're struggling with something beyond just your intellectual capacity to solve this. I know I could go read a book, but I don't have time, or I don't want to, or whatever, I'm going to put it off. It's something else at work. Well, okay, so I think I can't speak Spanish. Elementary school, 6th grade or so. I'm still going to my grandmother's at least once a week. for lunch. My grandmother doesn't speak any English. I don't speak any Spanish. So you would think we had a problem. But a grandmother and a grandson sitting down for lunch is not a problem. And nobody should make it into one. What we did is we invented a third language. One that we both could speak. And it was simple, and you will understand it. She would cook, and I would eat. That's how we talked. Grandmothers, you know what I'm talking about. Let me read this poem about that time. We called her Nani, the diminutive of Nana. You know, you could go to the planet Neptune and ask where the Nanas are, and they'll point you to the grandmothers. That word is like universal. Sitting at her table, she serves the sopa de arroz to me instinctively. And I watch her, the absolute mama, and eat words I might have had to say more out of embarrassment. To speak now foreign words I used to speak too, dribble down her mouth as she serves me albóndigas. No more than a third are easy to me. By the stove, she does something with words and looks at me only with her back. I'm full. I tell her I taste the mint and watch her speak smiles at the stove. All my words make her smile. Nani never serves herself. She only watches me with her skin, her hair. I ask for more. I watch the mama warming more tortillas for me. I watch her fingers in the flame for me. Near her mouth, I see a wrinkle speak of a man whose body serves the ants like she serves me. Then more words from more wrinkles about children, words about this and that, flowing more easily from these other mouths. Each serves as a tremendous string around her, holding her together. They speak Nani was this and that to me, and I wonder just how much of me will die with her. What were the words I could have been or was? Her insides speak through 100 wrinkles now, more than she can bear, steal around her, shouting then, what is this thing she serves? She asks me if I want more. I own no words to stop her. Even before I speak, she serves. Have you ever tried to tell your grandmother that you don't want any more to eat? You can't tell your grandmother you don't want more to eat. It doesn't work that way, right? I have more things, but I think we're probably running a little long. So, does anybody have any questions before I? Yes.
Yeah, Tito, I got a comment. You know, where you grew up, I grew up in Northern California. Yeah, farm workers from Chihuahua, and I learned that there were two types of people as I was growing up. There were the Mexicans, came from all over Mexico. There were the whites who owned the land that we worked, and there was a big contrast. They had the money, they controlled us. We had the rashness to ask for a little more money because we weren't making enough money. They simply would tell us to leave, and they would bring somebody else in. And so I went to college, and I took a sociology class. And what happened is I went there with one purpose. My purpose was to get a college degree so that I could become a social worker and help Mexicans that needed to go to the welfare, or not very many that use the welfare. They use more like the unemployment during the winter,
Right.
and that kind of stuff. And then they borrow groceries from the grocery store, and then they would pay it when they started working again. So that's the way I grew up. So I equated all Mexicans were good. You know, when we're little, we see things in black and white. All Mexicans were good and all whites were not good. And I went to college with that attitude. I was not going to mix with white people. I was going to take the classes, graduate, get the degree, and go back home and do that. And there was a professor, sociology professor, and he asked us to spend a weekend in somebody's house that was not from your culture.
Well,
And I refused to spend a weekend at a white student's house. And so he said, you have to, you can't get a final grade if you don't do this. And I said, well, I'll withdraw. And he went to the registrar and he said, if this guy shows up, don't let him drop the class. And he said, he talked to me for about 2 weeks. Finally, I agreed to go with 2 other Chicano students. And we went there, and I said, we're going to go there, she's going to feed us Mexican food. We have better Mexican food at home. But I went, and Dr. Vizcan was Vizcaíno. And that started me opening up to the fact that there's good people and bad people in all cultures. But I still carried that feeling inside, like you said, still in there. And so when I got my doctorate at the University of Minnesota, I started applying for jobs, and I avoided the South. I avoided Texas, Georgia, and all of that because of the way that the Tejanos had treated my family when we came across to New Mexico. And so, in a way, I did myself a disservice because some of the better jobs that I was offered were major universities in Texas or other places like that. So I kind of narrowed my view, and then I wanted to come to the Southwest. Got the opportunity to come here. I came here to ASU, been there 26 years. And so one of my jobs is to try to get my students, I think I coined this word, but don't quote me on it, but I think I call it the University of Psychological Moratorium. Where we take a time out to explore ourselves, and explore other cultures, and discover what the wealth of different people, like you living across people that were Scottish, and you know, whatever other countries that the parents came from. And so, another experience that I remember real quick is coming to ASU then, and we had just started the Chicano graduation, Hispanic convocation. We had just started. And I remember seeing our students come through the lines, and they were all in teachers and social work. Teaching and social work, teaching and social work. And I said, how come not in mathematics? How come not we're in the science? How come not we're in engineering? How come we're not in pre-med fields and so on and so forth? So I started mentioning that in my classes and all that. And now I go to the convocation.
And it's totally
everybody from everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay? So the university experience gave me that psychological moratorium that I needed to make myself realize that I was actually being pretty narrow in the way that I thought. But that was guided by the way I was raised. You know?
And you know what? Let me add to that, this idea of how you get to university. How do you get to that? Right? Because you don't know where. It's not automatic.
Yep.
Coming out of Nogales, when I graduated a long time ago, in 1970, and when I graduated, there were about 100 of us in the graduating class, and there were about 1,000 in the freshman class. The dropout rate, it was like a ski slope, right? For if you calculate those numbers, it was ridiculous. And about 4 of us went to U of A. I didn't go to U of A. We were, you know, Nogales High School in those days. It was not a college preparatory experience. Produce tourism, the things that Nogales had, but produce in particular, cattle raising, you know, ranching, that sort of thing. Those were all the big deals. And actually, for people to drop out of school at like their sophomore year, freshman, very common. You had family business. You had to go help. And it was not about, you know, not respecting school. You were respecting family. That's an odd, hard thing that, you know, which one wins there? That's a hard one. Because living on a ranch, for example, you had to follow the cycle of the ranch of the year. And school didn't follow that. So that's a very interesting dynamic. Well, we didn't get any college, you know, people coming in telling us apply here. I went to U of A because it was just there. It was like the closest school. I didn't know how to go to university. I had good grades. I was a good student. I was smart enough to know to apply. but I didn't really know why. And I can tell you this in all sincerity. I did not know how to go to a university, period, end of report. What I did know how to do, because I was a good student, is I knew how to go to 13th grade. I had gone from 1st to 2nd to 3rd to 4th. I had finished 12th. What comes next? 13. And that saved me. If I thought I was going to the university, I would have been squashed, psychologically squashed. That seemed so overwhelming, so big. 13 just seemed next. So I went to U of A, showed up, and one of the first things they asked me was, what's your major? I'm going to make a joke. It's kind of a bad joke, but it was very real at the time. The word major had military connotations. This was still during the Vietnam War. They said, what's your major? You know, I think I'm getting a deferment because I'm in... No, I said, that's not what we mean. What are you interested in? I said, I don't know. Aren't you supposed to tell me? They said, all right, go see an advisor. And they gave me an advisor in political science. So I go over to the advisor and we schedule things. He says, all right, let's see what your major is going to be. What are you going to major in? What are you interested in? I said, I don't know. He says, he takes a big, deep breath. All right. He gets the university catalog. Astronomy. I said, well, what's that about? He says, stars. Okay. Agronomy. What's that about? Plants. Okay. We go botany. Oh, plants too, I think, he says, you know. We go chemistry. I said, chemicals. And he goes on. This one little line tagline. Then we get to political science. What's that about? He says, son, let me tell you. And he talks for like the next hour about political science. So what did I become? We all became whatever advisor we went to see. And the truth of it is, first 2 years in college, general study, it doesn't really matter very much at that point. I hit college at a pivotal time, when I was getting ready for my junior year at U of A. It's like computers were just suddenly invented in academia. And for the very first time, they invented something called pre-registration, which meant that you didn't have to go to campus, you didn't have to go to your advisor, and then you didn't have to run around all the different places to get, I need to get in this class, and oh no, it doesn't work with this class. It was a very physical, you used to have, it took all day, it took a week, to do this, those days. Pre-registration. Didn't have to have your advisor there. So my other 3 friends who were still at U of A and I were in my bedroom that summer, and we were reading a book like we had never read a book before. And it was the college catalog. And you know what we were looking for is exactly what everybody else in the country was looking for that year. The mythical, easiest courses we could find. You're a kid. That's how it works, right? So we're flipping through.
I wrote a book about that. And he says, I'm always dissenting, I'm always voting against it, I always get outvoted. So he resigned from the panel. And I asked, after 50, 60 years of knowing what's right for bringing up bilingual children, why doesn't Arizona do it? Other states are doing it, why doesn't Arizona do it? And one of the people on the committee said, Dr. Nanius, he goes, we don't do what research says we were supposed to do. We do what our constituents want us to do. So they know, but they won't apply it. They won't apply it because the people that are voting are the ones from Sun City and so on, and they want to be back in the 1950s. And this is not the 1950s.
That is so stupid.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I think, when we speak, I think we need to use the proper word. And the proper word is stupid.
Just to add a little point to what Mike was saying. Throughout my career, I've taken some communication classes, and you learn different things like the encoder, decoder, and effective speaking. And said the big thing that stuck in my mind was somebody told me, or I heard it there in one of those classes, that words only have meanings to the people that use them. Which I think is whatever you're communicating, what you're saying, you know what you're saying. Does the other person understand or is receiving that communication?
I'm going to read a poem about that exactly. I have two things to read. I'm so sorry, but you got me excited. I have two things to read here. One is my grandmother's name was Refugio. I told you, we called her Nani, but her name was Refugio, Doña Cuquita. What's important to know about this is in Mexico and Latin America, it's common to celebrate, it's changing, but it's common to celebrate one's saint's day instead of one's birthday. And the reason for that is a birthday is what separates you from everybody, and a saint's day is what joins you to everybody. Two different points of view about the world. Let me read this poem. I was born in Nogales, Arizona, on the border between Mexico and the United States. The places in between places, they're like little countries themselves, with their own holidays taken a little from everywhere. My 4th of July is from childhood. Childhood itself, a kind of country, too. It's a place that's far from me now, a place I'd like to visit again. The 4th of July takes me there. In that childhood place and border place, the 4th of July, like everything else, it meant more than one thing. In the United States, the 4th of July, it was the United States. But in Mexico, it was the Dia de los Refugios, the Saints' Day of people named Refugio. I come from a family of people with names, real names, not afraid names, with colors like the fireworks. Refugio, Margarito, Matilde, Álvaro, Consuelo, Humberto, Olga, Celina, Gilberto. Names that take a moment to say. Names you have to practice. These were the names of saints, serious ones, and so it was right to take a moment with them. I guess that's what my family thought. Our connection to saints was strong. My grandmother's name, here it comes, her name was Refugio. And my great-grandmother's name was Refugio. And my mother-in-law's name now, it's another Refugio. Refugios everywhere. Refugios and shrimp cocktails and soda. 4th of July was a birthday party for all the women in my family, going way back. A party for everything Mexico and where they came from. For the other words and the green-tinted glasses my great-grandmother wore. These women were me, what I was before me. So that birthday fireworks in the evening, all for them, this seemed right. In that way, the fireworks were for me, too. Still, we were in the United States now. And the 4th of July, well, it was the 4th of July. But just what that meant in this border, place, and time, it was a matter of opinion in my family. Let me just finish with this one. A while back, when Janet Napolitano was still the governor, we were getting ready for the visit of Presidente Vicente Fox of Mexico. You all know do you remember him? Do you remember what he looked like? He's about 10 feet tall and wore a cowboy hat. Well, he was coming up to visit Arizona, and it was actually the first time a sitting president of Mexico was going to come and visit Arizona, even though so many presidents of Mexico have come from Sonora, right? Well, he was coming to visit, and I was at a thing with the governor, and she said, we're going to talk about all this big stuff, but we need like an ignition. We need a key. We need I said, you need a poem. She said, that's what I need. And she asked if I would write a poem for this. And I wrote this poem, and I got to read it when Vicente Fox came to visit at the Phoenix Civic Plaza. There were like thousands of people. They had the big things, and what I'll never forget, by the way, we were up on the dais up there, right? The governor and I was standing there, and I was kind of in the position of the invocation, right? And we were waiting for him. And we're looking to the side, off in the wings, we're looking when all of a sudden, from the back of the room, he starts to walk. I thought, man, it was pure theater. And I thought, that's just ridiculous. That's and then I realized, and I have never forgotten this, that there was something bigger than theater. people kept reaching out to touch him. And when they did that, they were touching an idea. Right? This was before all of the big problems that now overwhelm us had started. They were touching something. They were touching history, a connection to a place, a memory, right? And a future. So I'm going to read the poem the way I read it that day. It's mixed back and forth. And I am very proud to say this poem is now on the newly opened Mariposa border crossing in Nogales. It's up on the wall, so 8 bajillion people see it every day. And he was standing next to me as a little bit of pressure. So Vicente Fox is standing right next to me, looking down right as I'm reading, and this is how it went. So it's called Borderlines, Líneas Fronterizas, and it has an epigraph. A weight carried by two weighs only half as much. Un peso cargado por dos no pesa más que la mitad. The world on a map looks like the drawing of a cow in a butcher shop. All those lines showing where to cut. El mundo en un mapa parece el dibujo de una vaca en la carnicería. Todas esas líneas mostrando dónde cortar. Pero ese dibujo de la vaca es también un rompecabezas mostrando cómo todas las piezas extrañas caben muy bien juntas. But that drawing of the cow is also a jigsaw puzzle, showing just as much how very well all the strange parts fit together. La manera en que miramos el dibujo nos hace ver la diferencia. Which way we look at the drawing makes all the difference. Parecemos vivir en un mundo de mapas, pero en verdad vivimos en un mundo hecho no de papel ni de tinta, sino de gente. Esas líneas son nuestras vidas. We seem to live in a world of maps, but in truth we live in a world made not of paper and ink, but of people. Those lines are our lives. Juntos demos vuelta al mapa hasta que veamos claramente. La frontera es lo que nos une, no lo que nos separa. Together, let us turn the map until we see clearly the border is what joins us, not what separates us. Any other questions? Yes.
Where can I get a copy of that?
I'll give it to you. It's coming out in my new book. I have a new book coming out in spring called A Small Story About This Guy. Ándale.
Do you by chance have capirotada with you?
I don't have it with me. I'm sorry. I didn't bring any
I
copies.
want to buy it and have you autograph it for me.
I'll be around. We have other opportunities.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Anything else? Okay.
yeah, we're going to have the AACHE conference in November again next year. And what I've been feeling is this man has a fire in the belly. But you know what? I see a fire in the belly of everybody here. Cada cabeza es un mundo lindo, and that's what's here.
I have some bookmarks.
Okay, great. And would you
Beautiful.
like
Thank you.
Dr. Alberto Rios at the November conference as our keynote? Of course. Let's ask him.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Absolutely.
That's all it said.
That's a big